facilitator, co-facilitators, and tossed a problem. And that problem is very much real world. It's very much, it has a community component. The facilitators generally pick the nonprofit, the community corporation or whatever that we're gonna work with. And then students, and they have to kind of muddle through that for 2 weeks. It's an 11-day intensive. There's 5 days of design work that is very much collaborative with the community. I'll speak a little bit about what we did this year in a minute, but and then 5 days or 6 days of design work, of actual construction. So hence the design build. The whole idea, from my understanding of it and what I see works really well in the 2 years that I did it, it's the ultimate community builder for students. It's the ultimate icebreaker. I've taken the model and I run it with my high school students now. I've done that for a couple of years. You take students who are green, who come from all different kind of walks and from different places and have different medium and different experiences, and throw them in a room and say, here's your problem, go. It's my job as a facilitator to make sure that some of the risk is mitigated, but that it is uncomfortable as hell, and that they have to kind of deal with that and learn through that and work through that and work through a design process that again, I am only there to kind of facilitate and also be a part of, which is super fun. So, you know, I see myself as a peer in this process. There are a lot of things that I don't know, and that's, you know, I keep coming back to this design build because it's so much fun for me to actually participate in as well. So this past year, just a few weeks ago, I guess, 2 months ago, whatever, we worked with the Urban League of Portland. The co-facilitator with me was Cleo Davis, a local African-American artist and activist in North Portland. And we pitched this to the students. The Urban League has, or had a grant from PBOT to do some beautification around their building in North Portland, on Russell and North Williams. And we kicked it to the students and said, hey, okay, so there's this collaboration. It's gonna be really, you know, it was a very intense time. It was a very uncomfortable time. We're working with a community that has been historically just shit on in Portland. And I have students coming from kind of all over the US and internationally that have no idea what the hell Portland's about or the history of Portland. And here's the first thing that they're gonna be impacted with or faced with and have to deal with. Their understanding of Portland is then, I don't want to say clouded, but at the very least, yeah, maybe colored with, it's a bad pun, with some realities of Portland and what is happening here and has happened historically. So it's not just about work, right? It's not just about producing some swanky benches for the sidewalk at the Urban League. It's about learning about each other. It's about dealing with each other. It's about getting all that shit out there the first 2 weeks, and then moving beyond that and getting into your own practice. Yeah, so that's a little bit about design build.
So I wanted to, you know, give everyone a chance to sort of, in terms of people who are overseeing or providing leadership with these types of aspects to the graduate curriculum, to kind of be able to introduce. And now I want to sort of turn this more into a conversation about the, you know, the sort of on-the-ground experience of these strategies, and you know, to tell some stories really about what happened, what you got excited about, what some of the big challenges were, how you handled it, just to kind of open that up a bit. I don't know. I was just thinking about, because I got to teach Harry in the print media in critique seminar. He was in the first cohort, and I remember that he worked on the Juniper project. And so that was a thing where even as a print media student, he was able to work across with another program in collaborative design to be a part of that project. So I think that's interesting, and maybe that's a sort of, you could talk a little bit about that and segue into maybe some of your experience in Watershed.
Yeah, so when I was in school, I kind of cross-pollinated with collaborative design, and I did the Juniper project, which what MK is saying is that we kind of design build out of this problem, the juniper tree, and try to work with it into making it something that is worthwhile, which is hard because they would always call problems in collaborative design these wicked problems. There's no easy answer to figuring this out. And you know, it's interesting with what collaborative design did with that project is that was a multi-year project where they would look at not only like policy, but they would look at design, and then what we actually kind of did is we looked at objects and what we could do with Juniper. And what was interesting coming from print media is I was actually able to take some of these ideas of Watershed in terms of these visual aesthetics and printmaking and apply them to this Juniper project where I think a lot of other students maybe in that program weren't coming with that artistic background. And so I thought that was a really interesting way to communicate with other programs within the Hallie Ford School of Graduate Design, or Graduate Studies, sorry. And it was, I met some really nice people over in the Juniper project. And it was really a worthwhile endeavor. But I think a lot of my learning comes from the Watershed program, which is what Matthew is the head of the department of. When I came to school here at PNCA, I was interested in printing professionally. And what the Watershed program allowed me to do was actually get that professional experience. I think it's easy enough to print on your own to make your own work, but until you start making work for other people, there's just that air of professionalism that might not be associated, that you might not associate with. And so what was really nice about Watershed is we would bring in sophisticated artists and we would work with them. And
Wow, I don't know. Yeah.
Sorry about that. But we would work with these artists, and it's easy enough to say when your work is done, but when the artist doesn't think the work is done, you have to work that much harder. And I think having some of these artists in, what comes to mind is we had an artist, Brad Brown, come in, and he's an artist out of San Francisco, and he teaches at SFAI. But it's this amount of focus that the artist needs and the print shop needs to have for that week of making. And to make a suite of prints or a suite of artwork out within that week is really an impressive feat, if you think about it. A lot of you are in the graduate programs now, and you've got these critiques, and you want to make work, but you always can't find time to make work. And so, what was really nice about having these artists in is you could see that the focus in terms of how to make work fast and how to make good quality work was really important, I think, in terms of my learning and my growth as a personal artist and studio artist as well. Thinking ahead of what I needed to do, not only to get the artists prepared for the or for the print studio, but then also for my own work as well, I thought was really important. I think that was what was really nice about Watershed, was working and with those artists and being those hands. And I think a lot of these big art projects that are happening, a lot of what you don't see are the hands behind it. And it takes a full team to do some of these things. And that's kind of what Watershed taught me, is that you need to work as these teams to get really good projects out.
Obviously, there's, the skills of collaboration kind of go across everything that you all are talking about today. I don't know if, Casey, you want to talk a little bit about your experience with Design Build, just kind of as a participant in it, and what some of the things were that were challenging, exciting for you.
Yeah, definitely. So I had moved here from Florida like 4 days prior to starting this. So like the fact that it got us like out in the community and like talking to each other on such an intimate level as well was a really important factor for me. and not just having other people to like rely on and having other people like experience things that, you know, they haven't experienced before, but also like dealing with like real issues within the community too. Um, yeah, I don't know. So like it got a lot of people doing things that they wouldn't have necessarily have done before. And I mean like the leadership of it, like the way that Matt had led it as well was really important as well because like being like actually like doing things and having hands-on.
Yeah, what were some of those hands-on things that you know, found yourself kind of engaging that you hadn't done before?
So, like Matt was saying, you know, like dealing with the urban league and everything, I think that was really important because it's a conversation, you know, if it was something that we hadn't been challenged with, then, you know, like I wouldn't have been, like you need real world things.
Yeah.
Right
That's
now.
okay. That's okay. Yeah.
Can you talk about how is it has any of it carried over in your work? How has those 2 weeks impacted the community of the students, but maybe also you know, your work individually?
Yeah, so being able to rely on each other and trying to get what you need from the community as well. I had never worked with a group of designers before at all, so having to navigate between like everyone having all these different ideas, but like also trying to incorporate what the Urban League like wanted from us and what they needed, and not trying to put too much of what we thought and what we were looking for in it as well. And I don't know, it just has all of us like able to rely on each other and see the skills that everyone else might have, and other people doing things like welding and things. Like it was a great introduction to welding for me as well. That's something that I've wanted to know for a long while, and something that I, you know, like thought that would be a longer process getting into it. So the fact that I was just thrown into it, I think was really important as well. And a lot of people experienced things that they wouldn't have, and it took them in different directions that they might not have even thought to go in.
Did you find that, like how did people skill share? Like how did you as a group learn who had what skills and how you could fill in certain blanks? You know?
Yeah, so it was a lot of just talking to each other and like people trying different things, and you know, you would ask like some people, it was a lot of like researching and learning, because you know, a lot of us, like a lot of different backgrounds, and a lot of us were doing things that none of us had done before. Like making the tiles and the cement and like the landscaping and welding and woodworking, and having to communicate with the community as well, and seeing like if they were able to donate things to like our cause and like what we had going on too. So that was also a really interesting aspect, is yeah, we're working with like such a limited budget too, and trying to like have the community really be involved as well and help us with everything.
It can be a pretty steep learning curve, I think. You know, the charge is that we are going to put something out there in the world that is fairly permanent. We have to work with materials that are going to last, right? So students are coming in as illustrators or fiber artists or web designers, and it's like, and we need to build something that is going to be on the street and it's going to be permanent for dozens of years, right? So yeah, the learning curve of like, how do we pour concrete? How do we work with steel? How do we weld? How do we finish that steel so that, you know, it's going to last, and we have to get it powder coated, blah, 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 and there's lead time for that, and so now this 2-week project turns into a month. I mean, it takes like the real world constraints of an actual project and throws them right on top of you. And this is not something that necessarily can happen in a studio environment alone, and you don't have a whole semester for it, and you can't just kind of mire in your own garbage and baggage around it, but that it has to be produced, and it has to be out there, and it has to work. And so that's where a lot of conversation happens. That's where a lot of mediation and a lot of, as the facilitators, sort of diving in and getting dirty with the work as well, and helping and teaching. And there is, you know, some teaching and learning that takes place as well. And then also, I think a lot of it is autodidactic too. I mean, it's just students being able to kind of figure things out. But yeah, I mean, I just think, you know, Casey is a great example of a student who came in with a certain set of skills and was immediately thrown into the steel shop, thrown out of her comfort zone, and had to kind of rise to that challenge because there's a bigger issue at play, right? I mean, there's a bigger picture. It's not just about her work right now. It's about the community and about this partnership that's happening. The students were asked to go to the Urban League and organize a design charrette with 15 middle schoolers. Probably something they never did. They had to facilitate that. They had to walk into that space with buckets of Sharpies and crayons and Play-Doh and run a 4-hour charrette. And all I said walking into it was, hey, this is happening at 11 a.m. tomorrow. You've got basically 26 hours to figure this out, and it's happening. All I've done is organize it and order pizza. Good luck.
Yeah, a lot of critical thinking and thinking on the fly and trying to come up with solutions to things that we had never dealt with before, like that. Also, I think it was the first time a lot of us had been through any sort of design process like that, like especially, you know, like seeing something from the conception, like fleshed out all the way to the finishing, like putting it in place somewhere, and then also working with like such a large group of people who have, you know, don't know each other and have, you know, such different things.
I think that's a really good point, just about like how you're prepared to, you know, how these things get introduced and framed, and then how you kind of go about them. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more from other programs too about, like, how do you set this up? Like, what's the framework for introducing it? Like, you have people, like we're saying, that have different levels of experience and understanding. So how are you, like, putting forward the problem or the opportunity?
So I can speak for Watershed that depending on the year, the semester, we do collaborations with Jordan Schmitzer's Family Foundation. So we have a visiting artist that comes in, and we try to produce a series of work with those artists that those tend to be pretty high-end problem-solving series where they're in for a short period of time. I have to, myself or Paul Maloney or one of the other printers that are kind of leading the project, has to get the students prepared to know kind of what the boundaries are, how to interact with an artist, how to prepare for what they're going to be doing. And at the same time, I'm also working with the artists to kind of pull out what their needs are, and knowing that within the professional printing area, I am not telling them what to do, but I'm kind of helping them move forward on the project, while also kind of keeping boundaries around, we have limitations on materials, time, space, and we're in an education institution, so I can't just shut down the lab to do a project, at least most times I can. So it's definitely a big challenge to kind of orchestrate, keep all that going, but also kind of take the step behind the artist and let them lead the project to get to where they're going with what their needs are. I can't dictate and say, you need to use this color, you need to do this type of shape or this mark, or but I can kind of put boundaries up to say, we can't make a print that's 300 feet wide. It's just impossible, or we can't do that on these presses because the press bed is only so big. And then there's kind of the time constraint that I normally try to get projects within a semester, so when we move into the next semester, it's not carrying over, but that doesn't always happen. And we do have projects that are still in motion 2 semesters down. So it's definitely, each experience is different. Each artist or collective or community events is different, because we don't just work with artists, but we do community projects where we've brought in Don't Shoot PDX, and we can have 50 to 100 people in the studio that have 0 experience, and they're all trying to make posters for a protest or a community event, and getting those kind of organized. And yeah, it's just every time it's a new thing.
Yeah, I'd just like to elaborate, I think, on what Matt and Matthew both said about the design build and Watershed, is that there's like a specific amount of professionalism that needs to go into both. Like, you know, like Matt's saying, you need to learn how to pour concrete so that this is structurally sound for its entirety. In the same way with Watershed, we want to make the best prints for our artists, and it's not just a haphazard manufacturing or printmaking technique. It's something that we have to be very sound with and knowledgeable about, because we do only have a little bit of time with these artists when we're in there. And I'd like to say from my own experience, that really kind of, I feel like, filtered into my own work as well. And I think it's a really interesting, at least from my point, the Watershed program and how to work with these artists. Like Matthew's saying, sometimes the projects go really well and you're really excited about it, and then sometimes they just drudge along and it takes years to get these projects done. But that's part of the problem, and that's how you need to, I feel like how through Watershed problem solving happens. It's how do you get a project that has gone off the rails back onto the rails? And it's, the answer is not always there. And sometimes it's just a stroke of luck that it gets back on there. But if you set yourself up for success, I think within those projects, it usually works out.
So I think you've brought up some important points, which is this whole way of learning is messy. It's a messy way of learning, and the reality is that's how it is out there, right? So it's, we don't come to every situation with all the tools that we need, so we have to problem solve on the fly. And in the case of collaborative design, so for example, one of the things that collaborative design and design systems does every year is they do a magazine called Radical. And it's out there from last spring, so please take one. And they have to take the magazine from the beginning to the end. So developing the themes, working with the printers, doing the design, finding the writers, going out and getting people, advertisers. And we can talk about this in a class, which we do all the time, right? We teach how do you introduce yourself to various different stakeholders, or talking to folks about advertisement. You can talk about that in a classroom, but until you're in the position of actually doing it, you don't know the complexity of it. And so these real world situations, this experiential form of learning is immediate. You have to deal with the mess of it all. You have to problem solve, and at the end of it, you have a skill that's real. Like, you just did it. You just got enough advertisers to mount a magazine, right? So it does a lot of things. You learn new skills, you develop confidence, right? You learn to work as part of a team. And for collaborative design, as and design systems suggest, we work collaboratively. So developing those skills as well, and learning how to be a good leader as well as a good team member is part of this. And since it's built into our classes over and over and over again, almost all the classes have
hold the line to these folks outside of your group, and that really changes um, uh, what the opportunity can provide for you, and how this thing can serve and function beyond just an educational process. So I think that's so valuable, and to think about institutions more as like, or graduate study as a porous membrane. It isn't just this like, secluded kind of space of learning and dialogue, that it really is important that it is sort of fluid between the inside and outside of that architecture.
Yeah, I don't think it can be. I mean, we can't just like cloister ourselves in these walls of academia anymore. We've got to get out there and learn how to engage and be activists and be citizens and like work with people. I mean, and do real work. Can I ask a question?
Oh, please.
Okay.
This is a conversation.
Yeah. MK, how do you identify community partners?
Collaborative design.
Yeah.
So, I don't, but I have an amazing set of faculty that do. So one of our founding members, Howard Silverman, works with 3 different community organizations this semester in his system or his systems thinking class course. So every semester he determines he reaches out semester before to different organizations, design companies, municipalities, cities, to see if there are projects that might be something that they would like to collaborate with us on. Currently we're working with Randy Gregg on the Maywood, the re-envisioning the city. So I know there's a lot of us are from Portland, right? So, or from the area. How many folks saw the Ann Hamilton show? Anyone? Okay. So in the back of the Ann Hamilton show, there was that wood model of the city. That's what we're using as the basis of this. So that model then gets turned into a gaming platform. So Randy brought that to us. And now we've been doing it enough that actually organizations reach out to us. And that might be in relationship to a faculty member. It might be in relationship to one of our alumni bringing something forward. So for example, some of our students are going to be working with OMSI these next 2 semesters on building the new design exhibition at OMSI. So, and David Leventhal, who's the creative director there, was one of our alumni. So now it's happening on its own, right? So people are reaching out to us, our alumni are creating experiences, and some of the projects that our students do are amazing, right? So Bridge Lab, which was David Leventhal's project for his thesis, is what we have here on our campus. And for example, we have Robin Crow, who is one of the alumni. Robin, right? Robin Crow, who is one of our alumni. She's now in Rhode Island. But for her first class with Howard Silverman for systems thinking, she developed I'm going to read this, a process for mapping social systems identity. And that became her thesis that she worked with Howard on, and now Howard is presenting that at a conference in Italy. So it's kind of growing out, and she actually is reaching back out to us for potential activities in Rhode Island. So some of this is just, it's generating on its own.
Yeah, I think too, this does not work. To Matt's question and MK's really thorough response, I'm curious to hear more about the extended or ongoing relationships or opportunities that have come from some of these experiences. And I think, for Harry, that's something you could speak about very specifically, and other folks may have other examples of alums or people that they have had contact with, or just, Casey's just sort of beginning of like absorbing what that experience is and what kinds
opportunity to then bring me down to San Francisco to work on projects with him. And you know, it's something that I want to do with Watershed. It's something I want to do with my professional art practice as well. And so being down there and still working with these artists in a professional setting really influences my own practice.
I was just going to say, this is something I say to students a lot about how they're interviewing all the time. But, you know, the outcome of Harry being involved in this kind of watershed experience and working with Paul, you know, he obviously over time demonstrated skills and capacities that made an opportunity to work with Paul professionally outside of this setting something that was possible. Yeah.
And you know, some of the projects we do down there are just awesome projects. It's really neat to still be able to work on these monumental prints outside of an academic setting. And you know, it is, I think, a testament to what Watershed tries to distill is that professional practice.
Kind of to add to that, some of the projects we've done in the past have led to new projects. So when we work with a gallery and we have success, those galleries will come back and say, can you work with this artist? Can you work with this artist? And that kind of keeps rolling on as we go. And one of the challenges being the director of that is making sure that we don't get stuck in a rut of the same project over and over, the same type of artist over and over, which is where we've kind of brought in community projects. And those community projects, say with Don't Shoot PDX, has led into other communities around Portland, and we're slowly kind of working to getting more of those different groups in. I've also have been working with different museums and organizations to develop projects that are not just the individual artists, but also kind of collectives. We've done things with C3 Initiative that their residencies kind of come back through, and you know, working with 6 people versus 1 changes the dynamic. And also the kind of level of projects that we've kind of brought in, I try to make sure that it's not like the blue chip artist all the time or the beginner. There's a range, that way the students don't get locked into the same type of thing. And all those lead to a community that we've developed along with my contacts when I professionally printed before getting into academia, that I'll reach out to Derriere Latoile Studios in New York or Gemini down in LA, and we're constantly in communication about this kind of cross-pollination of both equipment and techniques and visiting artists, and we're linked in, so it's kind of creates this broad network that that's where Harry got to go to San Francisco. I've sent students to New York or down to LA, and we have a bunch of alumni printing at Gemini right now, and it's just amazing to see that happen.
Matt, this is the second project that you've done with ACD, and you said the first one was about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you've noticed sort of continue? Are there any students that you were in touch with, or ways in which you have any sense of how the experience has resonated?
Yeah. Let's see. I haven't really kept in touch with any students. I've run into a couple of bars occasionally, but so 5 years ago we worked with Albertina Kerr over on North Williams also. Come to think of it, like 2 blocks from the Urban League. So we were working with adults with disabilities, differences in ability, mental disabilities, and they had this awesome like artist program and gardening program and like woodshop, and folks were there kind of all day long. So we ended up building them a chicken coop. I think a tree fell into their chicken coop or something like that. And but you know, in riding past there this year, 5 years later, they've moved locations, and everything is just defunct. The chicken coop's back there. It's in terrible kind of disarray. And you know, it's kind of heartbreaking in a way. We put so much energy and time into that, but I also think at the end of the day, that's not necessarily the point, is the product, but the community relationships, the community building that happened with the students, the relationships with those folks, and the experiences that those folks took away from working with the students, and being clients, and being out there working with us, and sharing the design process with us. But I think that for me set the stage for what type of relationship or what type of community partner we were after. So in thinking this year about who we were going to work with, Cleo and I have been sort of talking and wanting to collaborate together. But it just made sense that we were doing something that wasn't, it wasn't a softball, right? It wasn't the lob. It wasn't an easy project by any means. I mean, so I think that's what resonates is just what type of product or what type of community member, community organization we decide to work with. We're not throwing this to the students to do like some simple whatever. I mean, we built benches for the Urban League, and we did some other fantastic just little planters and these tiles that are embedded in the concrete that students from the Urban League got to design and paint. And those are really kind of simple products, right? There's nothing extravagant about those products or especially difficult about those products. And at the end of those products are not going to last forever either, just like the chicken coop. But it's the experience, right? It's the experience that our students and their community take away from this whole collaboration. That's the crux of it. That's the whole point of experiential ed, I think. Because that's what we want to do. We want to go out there, and you guys want to go out there in 2 years and do work. And you learn from those things and just become a better practitioner and a more empathetic practitioner and just a better human in general.
I like that phrase, empathetic practitioner, because I think as printers too, you have to be empathetic with the artists that come in there in terms of showing them what is available and what's not available. So I think that's a really lovely term.
I have this really generous list of questions that some of the graduate students provided, but I think in the interest of time and wanting to not have this just be what's happening on this little raised area here, I think we'd love to open it up to the audience for questions, and then we can fill in some of our own up here as appropriate. Hello, thank you for sharing your experiences. I have 2 questions, 3, but I'll just make it 2. So can you share any pitfalls, any things you've run up against that have taught you in a good way? And then do you have a protocol or checklist that you go through with each of your engagements with this experiential learning? Is there some kind of checklist? And I just, following up on that, it's the experience. I want to challenge that a little. Of course it's experience, you're an educator, but don't you want your products to go on and live? So just a question.
So with with respect to the product, just briefly, I find that everything I do, buildings, architecture that I've worked with students or done on my own, it takes on a life of its own as soon as you walk away from it, and it has to kind of live and breathe as its own entity, and you have to be able to let go of the ownership at some point. You take your sexy pictures and put them on your portfolio, and then you've got to kind of walk away and hope that it exists and has that life. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Absolutely, I would have loved the chicken coop to still be there. The houses that I've built to not be graffitied. But it is what it is once it's out there.
I think that something that Allan deSouza said last night actually is the agency of the object. So you can do all that you can, to try to get it ready to be out there. But I mean, once it's out there, the people are going to do what they want. They're going to take what they want. It's whatever is going to happen to it is, you know, it takes on a life of its own.
We're kind of in a different situation where when we're working on projects that are going to a gallery or museum, that I also have to take into account that there's going to be a buyer, a collector, a collection that's going to take on these products. So it's kind of, that's integrated into our process, that I have to make sure that not only are we making the work, but we're making it with quality materials that are going to outlive us. At least within the fine art world, when we do a print. So the inks, the paper, even the solvents and chemicals that are in the project itself have to be at a certain level that I know that 10 years down the road, I'm not going to get a call from a collector saying my print is starting to turn color and we want our money back and we paid $40,000 for it. You know, we're not making prints at that level, but there's that chance that the prints we do make will start to raise in value. So that becomes super critical, and we're doing something that's going to be documented, signed, and go back to a gallery for sale. But when we work on a project, say for a community event, it might be a poster that goes out onto the street, and I just recently have been looking at our recent posters in a activist event last weekend that probably some of you have seen on the news. Some of those posters were more quick, one-off type things that aren't made to so much last, but be part of the experience. So it really is determined by the project and how we go about it. And kind of getting back to your other question about protocol and follow through, there is a process that I go through that each project's a little bit different, but there's kind of a series of ways we look at a project and how we close it and end it. And when it's with a fine art gallery or a museum, there's documentation that has to come with that project. So it's kind of the beginning development stage all the way to the final documentation stage to make sure that we've kind of capped that off and the students take that with them.
So you have to have protocol, because if you don't, nobody wants to work with you again. And for collaborative design, you know, we're trying to continually engage new organizations. So there's different protocol depending on who the stakeholder is and who the audience is and who we're working with and what needs to be done. So some of that is flexible, but the faculty that's leading that experience works with the students to in a continual follow-back loop, so that we make sure that we are doing everything necessary.
You know, it's about developing an ethical framework as well, and that these students are thinking about systems of oppression and undoing these sort of structures, and that they're bringing that in, and that they're also learning within these different groups, and they're not just like going in and thinking that they can just like do something in a vacuum and then leave.
I think that's one of the most important aspects of this form of learning when you're walking into a community that you don't know. How you come to that community, that organization, that business, that group, whatever, you're on their territory and you come with a level of respect. We run a class called Creative Leadership, Equity and Ethics, and it really talks about all of those elements, like what are the responsible approaches to engaging with members of communities and organizations.
Yeah, I mean, with the Urban League, that was a really important thing as well, because it's not all about just the making, like learning about like collaboration, you know, about materials and stuff like that, but it is also about like expanding your mind and your sensibilities otherwise too.
Which is a huge part of the design process. And just to get with protocol and you know, there is a process. We can outline it. I talk about it with my high school students. We break it down into the acronym IDEA. It's the investigation, it's the empathy building and the research, it's the prototyping and ideation and iteration, it's developing a project, it's then executing the project, putting it out there in the real world, and then ultimately reflecting on it, analyzing it, using it to educate the next class. There is very much, you know, a process that we follow that is pretty universal to all the projects. You know, the variant obviously is who the community member is, who the community group is, and how we, you know, and the specifics that go into the empathy building and to the research process around that. Yeah.
My question is actually really specifically for you in terms of how these design challenges affect the students' ability to not be interested in a perfect product, but to like test something and put it out there. Because I know, like, as a maker myself, often that there's like paralysis around like this isn't good enough yet, and then like sort of there's a stall in that. And I wondered if that how that being part of a design challenge positively influences students as makers, particularly at the high school level. I'm curious about.
Yeah, at the high school level, I mean, it's a whole different animal. Just in the sense that the students I work with, they come to me without the confidence of being makers. I mean, I'm dealing with young adults who are the ultimate consumers, you know, the American teenager. And how do we, you know, so I'm constantly struggling with like, how do we tap into any sort of creative juices that are there, that are sort of latent, that are left over from like middle school or even younger when they actually knew how to, or had the confidence to create. I don't know, but I do it because when they do create something, I mean, it's so phenomenal to see their reaction, to see the sort of engagement and buy-in that they have around that, and it's cracking through that initial shell of the design process and like, yeah, getting ideas from here out. Being able to test those things, being able to get out something that is real that they can stand and look at, and then maybe have even the pride to say that someone bought this, someone wanted this, someone's coming to pick it up next week. I mean, that is just it takes it to another level for them. You know, we can start to have those sort of metacognitive talks around entrepreneurship and that sort of engagement and what it does to them as consumers, but I think immediately it's just like, damn it, I made something, and that feels amazing.
I think for me, it was important to, like, I'm less afraid, like I definitely gained a confidence and I'm less afraid of experimenting with new materials and like, you know, not thinking like, oh, I have this like piece of metal and it's so precious. It's like, well, just go for it and do it and try it. Yeah, and to make something that will actually last in the end, I mean, that's my train of thought.
So I have a quick question also from Matt, right? So I've done a lot of work in the community of Carleton, but also in Newburgh. So my question's a little bit more directly about that community and how to work with them, especially as it's a community with so much energy around inclusivity, especially of the prominent Latin American culture, and the challenges that come with working with those communities that might value specific art forms over others. And there's also the Chehalem Cultural Center there, which is incredible, and the Anvil Academy. And could you talk a little bit about community engagement beyond the public school system?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I've bounced around. I think I mentioned that. This is the first. Let's see. I think I've taught at like 5 high schools in the last 7 years. I'm in Newburgh for my second year. I intend to stay in Newburgh for a few more years at least, which will be a first for me. And it's because of exactly what you're talking about. I have found a community that will step up. It's a weird place, Newburgh. There's these clashing sort of community elements. You've got the wine country, and you've got the sort of gentrification that's happening with that, and you've got this very rural place as well, and in that population. But you, weirdly enough, have like these incredible religious institutions. And for me, coming at this as a pretty devout atheist, to walk into and sit with a bunch of pastors and to like, for them to not care, for me to not care, because at the end of it, we all just give a shit about doing something positive for the community. So I've been working with Love Inc., which is love in the name of Christ. Love Inc. runs a women's shelter. It's the only women's shelter in Newburgh for domestic abuse survivors and for formerly homeless women. My students are building tiny homes that will be next step sort of affordable transitional housing for those women. We built our first one last year. We're going to build another one this year. 2 different church communities have come to the table and said, hey, we're going to fund this first one. So after one conversation over coffee, I had a church raising $20,000 for us to build the first one. I have another church community congregation wanting to build the tiny home village to support these things and to support Love Inc. and to support these women. That is so far beyond what the school district gives me. Nothing. I have no budget, literally nothing. So I'm beating the pavement to talk to community, to get that money to make these things happen, and they're stepping up and they support it. I've been in communities that don't support this, where the only support I had was the administration, the superintendent, the principal, and it doesn't work in that instance. You have to have that community buy-in. And yeah, I mean, to your point, Newburgh's been phenomenal. Yeah.
Probably should be rolling up.
Wanted to see if there are other questions. We have some questions up here.
We have a really over our hour.
I thought we were until 11:30. Okay.
11:15.
Okay, well, I guess, yeah, we have just a few more minutes, and I have questions from students that I can articulate, but I also want to remind everyone that the folks that are sitting up here are going to be around, kind of lingering about after the panel and the break between this and the workshop on teaching while marginalized. Is that right? So if you have questions about design build, about collaborative design, design systems, print media, watershed, and please access these experts over here about that. Does anybody have other comments they wanted to bring up, or?
Well, let's open it up to the questions. They're
Okay,
great.
I'll read a question. How's that? What leadership styles do you think are most fitting for experiential learning environments?
For me, the way that Matt led the design build really worked. It was interesting knowing who he is in the community, but then also seeing him be kind of vulnerable and saying, I mean, I don't really know how to respond to this. I don't really know how to answer that. I don't know how to do that. And like us working through it together. Just like that sort of openness and like a calm, we will get through it, but we just need to think about it and like discuss it with other people and all these different avenues that we can like find solutions for.
I was just going to add, patience is something that comes up a lot.
Absolutely.
You never know, you're bringing a group of students in that come from different backgrounds that, at least from my perspective with Watershed, that not everyone wants to be a professional printer. Not everyone wants to work with artists. They're here for their own reasons. And allowing patience to kind of let the process evolve to show that some of these skills that are kind of unfolding in front of them, even though they don't know it immediately, later on kind of comes through. Patience with the artists that have their own expectations when they come in, or a community group, and it's that kind of balancing out of expectations between what you want to get out of it, what they want to get out of it, and what the student needs to get out of it. So.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, things that happen in the classroom, the sort of setting of the institution. It's so much about student-centered learning. And then there's a kind of way that equation gets flipped a little bit when you are kind of staff, or you're kind of working not just with but for somebody else, and how that changes how you have to identify, how you engage, how you respond, how you ask for what you need. It's like it just changes.
I think that's why it's important that who the facilitator of whatever project that you are on is obviously an empathetic leader, but also the type of leader that can help everybody that's part of the experience understand their value, and help everybody come into the project as an active member and a valued member. And that means somebody who's also has a high level of emotional intelligence. And what I mean by that is understanding that all the folks in the room are going to have lots of different personalities, and that to make sure that the group works in a positive way, that you have to take into consideration that some people are more outgoing, some people are shy, but everybody has something to offer to the project, and that type of leadership and that type of facilitator, I think, is a productive leader.
Yeah, and from our design build, I felt really validated and heard, and that really helped my confidence and going forward in my professional practice. It's definitely something like, my voice actually matters in these projects and in the community. It's definitely something that's going to have a lasting impact, for sure. It already is.
Yeah, I think confidence is a really good characteristic for someone in a leadership role to have as well, especially on some of these projects that where you don't know the outcome or even what it's going to be. And so being able to have confidence and knowing that you'll be able to make something happen, I think is a really valuable asset.
I'm just thinking about MK's comment about how messy this kind of way of learning is, and it brings me to this question from another graduate student, which is, how do you determine the qualities that make the most effective experiential learning setting? And like how does the kind of physical setting, the sort of dynamic of that environment affect the experience? You were talking about like the working styles of the artists and the different styles they have, and how that affected the environment that was kind of conducive to the project. So just wondered if we start with Watershed around that. You talked about Brad Brown and Allison Sarr.
Yeah, so all the artists that come in, they have their own kind of mind, and they have their own agenda is probably the right word of what they want to make, and setting up a productive environment for them leads to, I think, a productive environment for the students as well, because there's like a flow to a print shop, and sometimes it clicks and sometimes it doesn't, but when that flow really clicks, there's a lot of engagement between, I think, the students and the artists, and how they're printing and how they're making work, and I think that that comes down to the nuances of having a good shop, a good community,
and being able to successfully accomplish what you want to do. And you want to talk some more about
I think, yeah, the environment's pretty critical when we're working with artists, that setting it up to make them feel comfortable as if they're in their own studio, to allow them to be kind of in that creative process without feeling like the students are getting in their way or the printer dictating what they need to be doing. So that's tricky, getting them into an environment they're not used to, having materials prepped and a process in front of them that they're able to actually be productive in the process it's a challenge, and it's, I don't know if we always have that ready on the spot. Sometimes we are adjusting on the fly, and that's something I think is really critical in these experiences, that you have to be flexible and know when I have to run out down to Lick Art Store to grab something that's missing, or know when I need to have things ordered and on site for certain artists. And it's that extra kind of follow through with a protocol to be prepared.
I want to add, because I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I think this is an important point to that question, is you shouldn't work with everybody. Like, it's seriously, like, part of the answer to that question is actually making the right decision and deciding if the group that has invited you in is the type of group that can work and respect the fact that they're working with a group of students, and that they are going to be learning in the process of also manifesting whatever project they are partnering. They are acting as a partner with you. So part of that is the responsibility of the person who is forwarding this project to decide if the partner that has come forward is the type of partner that is affording a situation that will be good for the students and will be something that they will have a takeaway and an outcome that will build confidence, give them the skills that, develop new skills, and develop a stronger sense of collaborative working styles. So that's
like rah-rah, that's a good thing to, I think, pause on. And thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to everyone here.
Okay, so speaking of experiential learning, our next event will be a participatory workshop that will begin at 11:45, and the subject is Teaching While Marginalized, What Our Bodies Can Teach Us About Critical Pedagogy. So please join us back after a brief break, and I hope you'll introduce yourselves to one another and mix and mingle. See you soon.
Casey, thanks, you rocked it.
I'm a little nervous in front of audiences.